started recording this, and now there will be also a broadcasting to YouTube. And yeah, by the way, I see that now there are also still people that didn't find it in the Facebook group, so I'm just sharing it in Facebook right now. Yeah, and just to make sure that everybody understands how it all works, I wanted to share with you the link to our Facebook community, where you can find all the Zoom links to our meetings, and also where we make our schedules of presentations besides keynote presentations. Yeah, so I explained last time how it all works. So basically, in 2 weeks before the meeting, I'm making there a post about the keynote topic. Yeah, hi. And yeah, you are just making your comments, and the first 3 comments who are made are taking the opportunity to make their short presentations after the keynote talk. Yes, so just please join this Facebook community and watch it. Wait for those posts about keynote talks when they are made there, and please comment on them. And also, I think it makes sense to to send you here our the link to the sorry, that's not that works. Sorry, it's not the right one. Yeah, this is the link to our YouTube broadcasting. If you want to share it with somebody, just copy it and send it to them. And so, sorry for taking your time for this, for all these organizational moments. Please, I think it is already time to begin our meeting today. And today the keynote talk will be held by Renata Ntelia from University of Malta. And the title of this talk is "Love in Games as Experience and Representation." Sorry. So, Renata, please, you can start.
Great, thank you so much, Alexei, and for inviting me. So let me share my screen. Can you see? Great. So yes, as Alexei said, I'll be talking about my PhD basically research, which is about love in games as experience and representation. Just a very brief introduction about me. My name is Renata Ntelia. I'm Greek, but I study in Malta at the Institute of Digital Games. You can see my email here in case you have any questions, any comments. If you want to discuss any of my topics further, I'll be very welcome. I'll be very happy to receive your mail. So I'll start by giving you a small story from my personal game history. When I was 3 years old, I received my first ever game console. It was a NES, and the first game I played was Super Mario Bros. Needless to say, I fell in love. Being an only child, I was finally able to play with something that responded to my actions instead of constantly enacting imaginary scenarios of adventure and exploration. Unfortunately for me, my allowed playtime was limited to a couple of hours every day. The rest of the time, I tried to simulate the experience by using prompts from a physical environment like chairs and my poor dog companion, Demo. It was a disheartening failure. Nothing could resemble the fun of timely jumping over obstacles, while there was no possibility of hitting blocks with my head to reveal gold coins and flame flowers that could turn me invincible. Most importantly, I could not replace the evil Goombas whose head I had to stomp on, no matter how hard I tried to train my dog to do my bidding. My real world was simply not designed to cater to my playing. Decades later, as a dedicated game scholar, this discrepancy continues to inform my research. It is for games who have a medium with unique affordances. Playing a game constitutes a lived experience. At the same time, it is the experience of a designed manufactured space, world, and environment that is specifically created to facilitate our agency. While this may seem constrained due to materiality and the algorithmic nature of digital games, it contains possibilities beyond that of our physical world. The physical world is our primary world, and as such, we perceive, conceive, and live worldness in accordance with its affordances. Yet it is still subject to limitations, just as our capacities as mortal beings are confined within the rules of nature and the society we partake in. In this, digital games can provide experiences which overcome our physical boundaries, experiences we may never have in our everyday life due to circumstances or natural restraints, or experiences that are simply better in the digital world because they are designed and executed as such, at least in some cases. What those cases are, the manner in which the experiences they provide are better, worse, and are different from those of the physical world, and investigating the reasons for this improvement or degeneration constitute the driving force behind my research. Within this context, love comes almost as an imperative. In a medium preoccupied with digitality, love as an experience that is infused with physicality becomes virtually liminal. The focus of my research is therefore whether love is an experience afforded by digital games. In particular, whether human players can fall in love with computer-generated characters. The subsequent queries addressed are the particular mechanics of such a possibility, and whether this experience is actually love or something players have come to associate with love. If it is the former, then games could instigate a relexicalisation of love to encompass experiences not conceivable and plausible before digital games. In other words, would the experience of love in games introduce such a novel understanding of it that we would need to expand our formal definition of the term? If instead the latter is true, then digital games help showcase the problem of representing love in general. Being a gamer myself, the answer to my initial hypothesis was almost automatic. Yes, players do experience love in games. I remember caring deeply for Clementine, the little girl I had to accompany in The Walking Dead, and later having my heart broken when I was forced by the game to kill myself as Lee after I had gotten infected so as not to turn into a zombie. The issue, however, is not so straightforward. In another game, Heavy Rain, I had to save my kidnapped son, Sean, as Ethan. While I was interested in the story and found the gameplay compelling, I did not care about Sean. I sympathized with Ethan's efforts and tragic moments as a father, yet my feelings remained detached. I felt sorry for the poor child and the plot made sense to me, but throughout the game I was invested in the mystery instead. I wanted to uncover the culprit, and if Sean happened to be saved, all the better. It is worth noting that I enjoyed both games. My emotional experience, though, was different. In Heavy Rain, I was excited and nervous about the thrilling plotline. In The Walking Dead, I was touched and moved to the point of actually crying, my hand trembling as I was trying to control the mouse in my final moments as Lee. So what was it that made me so attached to Clementine and Lee, but not as engaged with Ethan and Sean? In The Walking Dead, I was indeed affected by what was happening to my playable character. In Heavy Rain, on the other hand, my experience was not equated with Sean's. He was a father in despair. I was solving a puzzle like a detective. Was it then a personal preference, a game design issue, or a little bit of both? Actually, it has become obvious that we already deal with two questions. The first is how a game can invoke feelings of love to a player, how it is possible, as in the mechanics of the process. The second question concerns what aspects of games are involved to allow such a contingency, therefore the mechanics of the form. The first question seems the most crucial, since the second depends on its outcome. Indeed, humans may love, care for, and get attached to non-human beings, like their pets and plants, or inanimate objects like their cars and personal collections. Yet, does the player's attachment to a digital character like Clementine function on the same principle? There has been considerable research that shows that loving a pet entails many benefits for our bodily and mental health and social life. Equally, love for objects has been associated with coping mechanisms and transference of trauma. Nonetheless, as Archer informs us, loving a pet, let alone an object, may be seen as problematic in evolutionary terms because, quote, attachment and devoting resources to another species are, in theory, fitness reducing, end of quote. For this, Archer argues that pets possess elaborate mechanisms that can manipulate human responses of care, love, and attachment, which, quote, were originally evolved to aid relationships with other humans, principally offspring and sexual partners, end of quote. In other words, pets have co-evolved in such a way as to trigger our attachment and care. Because of this evolutionary fitness of the animals, quote, these mechanisms can, in some circumstances, cause pet owners to derive more satisfaction from their pet relationship than those with humans, because they supply a type of unconditional relationship that is usually absent from those with other human beings, end of quote. According to this, an attachment with an animal is more rewarding in a controlled manner. We know that our dog, for example, will be waiting for us when we return home at the end of the day, and no matter what, will be happy to see us. A security that cannot be guaranteed in any human relationship, not even that between parents and children. So do we get attached to digital characters because they're rewarding in a similar way to how pets manipulate our system of attachment and care? Animal pets have evolved because their symbiotic relationship with us increases their survival rate. Yet digital characters are designed by us. Does this mean that we design digital characters, or fictional for that matter, to be emotionally manipulated by them? Moreover, if emotional manipulation is indeed our aim, can we actually achieve it through digital characters? It is again useful to see how this evolving mechanism works in pets. Archer tells us, quote, because of the ability to attribute mental states to individuals with human-like behavior, humans are able to fill in the enormous gap between themselves and non-human animals in terms of language and thought. They therefore attribute human feelings and thoughts to the pet, thereby setting up a perceived relationship with it. The formation of such relationships is likely to be accentuated where people have fewer or less fulfilling human relationships. End of quote. There are two significant observations in this. One, humans are able to get attached to non-humans if these exhibit human-like behavior. Humans then attribute humanness to non-humans to get attached to them. Two, these relationships seem to develop in the absence of fulfilling human relationships. Combining this with the previous remark by Archer concerning rewarding and unconditional attention from our pets, we can surmise that humans tend to develop attachment to non-human agents because these relationships have a more controlled outcome. Our attachment to our pets then is achieved due to the fact that we consider them almost as humans, but at the same time, it is exactly because they do not actually perform like humans that we prefer to get attached to them. Quote, some people may greatly value their relationships with their pets because they supply them with the type of unconditional, adoring relationship that has eluded them, and indeed most of us, when other human beings are involved, end of quote. As a matter of fact, it is this unconditional and rewarding non-humanness of the pets the reason humans may prefer them. As such, humans bestow upon their non-human companions a manipulated or imagined humanness that borrows characteristics from a biologically designed or perceived non-humanness. Attaching then oneself to a non-human has nothing to do with the ontology of the non-human, but with our perception of it. Digital characters can equally trigger our attachment and care system, their non-humanness notwithstanding. Indeed, research has shown that human players get attached to virtual pets, even though there are physical considerations that may impact the effect of their companionship. This is a matter of degree and not of possibility anymore, or rather manner and not mode. Physical pets are already non-human, so virtual pets do not possess a different ontology which would violate our mechanisms of attachment. We can get attached to non-humans in a virtual world in the same manner that we can get attached to non-humans in our physical world. In other words, digital characters can invite attachment and care from human players, albeit in a different way and intensity due to their materiality. Yet here we're faced with an arguably more difficult question. For human players, getting attached and caring for digital characters is one thing, but can they actually fall in love with them? Experiencing love with a digital character requires an additional potential that seemingly transcends fictionality's and digitality's capacities. It does not suffice that the player loves a character. This character has to love them back. Here, this small word that is the preposition with makes everything more complicated. One might have less difficulty to argue that human players fall for digital characters, since this does not imply as much an active participation of the other party as falling in love with someone does. How can this ever be? This is not a matter of unrequitedness, as in the case with another person that is not interested in our romantic feelings towards them. This is a matter of ontology and inability. A fictional and/or digital character cannot love us because they cannot acknowledge us. They're perceived as intentional beings when actually they're not. They're scripted behavior designed to execute certain commands in certain pre-configured contexts. Similar to how our pets have evolved, digital characters are created to manipulate our emotions. Clementine is designed in such a way as to make the player feel protective over her. Yet while this non-humanness, as argued before, works in favor of beings, physical and virtual alike, who are in need of our protection, it seems to be working against the experience of romantic love. In romantic love, we have to become the object of love, attachment, and affection as much as we are the subject. It must be a shared experience of equality. In this regard, I argue that human players most definitely cannot fall in love with computer-generated characters. Even if a human player has the inclination to, their love can never be realized into an actual experience of love, since it cannot be reciprocated. Yet there are still feelings involved, as the following autoethnographic experience will show. In Mass Effect series, I pursued a romantic relationship with a non-playable character, NPC, Thane Krios. I chose him out of a number of valuable romantic interests, and he reciprocated my feelings. Yet our love story was fictional. Thane did not truly reciprocate my feelings because he was not aware of them. As a matter of fact, he was not aware of me as a person either. As a computer-controlled object, he manifested specific commands after I had activated his appropriate responses through a dialogue tree. After all, what were my feelings exactly? I found his appearance attractive and his personal history engaging. I also liked the sound of his voice. But did I really know him? I could not ask him all the questions I wanted. I could only talk to him by picking predefined choices. I could not touch him, smell him, tease him, and make him laugh, or even anger him to see how he reacted. He was nothing more than a moving image and an audio file of a voice actor. Yet he still managed to win my attention and affect my gameplay. I would often visit him in his room in the spacecraft we both lived in to just stand for a few moments beside him and gaze at the stars through the window. I could not have any other meaningful interaction with him because I had exhausted all the available dialogue options the game allowed me in my engagement with him. This was the only way I found to be intimate with him. Later in the game, I made a poor choice which resulted in his narrative death. I was crestfallen. I immediately loaded the previous save and played the whole mission from the start. I did not care that I had to spend time replaying parts of the game I had already experienced. I could not imagine finishing the game without Thane by my side. In the third and final game of the series, Thane had fallen seriously ill and died in the capital's hospital. His last words were a prayer for me, his siha, his term of endearment for me. I cried when Thane died. My avatar did not, but I did. As the above example shows, even if this experience is not love, there are feelings involved. These feelings and this experience are then in need of, if not a new name, at least a definition that serves to distinguish them. This is especially true because not all games are able to afford such feelings to all players. As a matter of fact, the same game may not afford these feelings to the same player when other characters are concerned. In the first Mass Effect game, before Thane appeared in my life in the second installment of the series, I romanced another NPC, Kayden Alenko. He was not bad looking and we were both in the military, so we had some things in common. Our relationship, however, was very lackluster. I felt Kayden was boring, to say the least. Truly, he was such a tool. At one point in the game, I had to make the choice of saving either Kayden or another character. I saved him not because I was interested in him, but because I wanted the other character, whom I found racist and xenophobic, to die. Kayden and I were nominally lovers, yet our relationship did not affect my feelings or my gameplay. This is why I declined his advances later in the game, and also in the third game after my true love, Thane, died. So the way love is portrayed and experienced in a game affects our impression of the game and our in-game actions as a whole. For this reason, it is important to examine the feelings developed by the players, even if they're not love proper. This contributes to our better understanding, not only of player experience, but of what love is as an experience in general. The feelings inspired to players for an NPC are so strong as to affect their game choices, their gameplay, and their game experience as a whole. Daniela Gatti, in Playing with Plants, Loving Computers, Queer Playfulness Beyond the Human, discusses how amorous playing with non-humans can be a way for us to question our subjectivity and human-centeredness. Attaching our desire to an object that cannot reciprocate is a valid way to transgress goal-oriented desire. We learn desire and love without the demand or requirement to receive something in return, a design mechanic that most games that include romance follow. While I agree that games include this potential, there are things to consider first. By saying that non-reciprocatory love is not goal-oriented, it implies that reciprocatory love is goal-oriented. In other words, that romantic love is preoccupied with what Gatti calls the assimilation of otherness into the self. And this is why playfulness, as described by Gatti, is an alternative mode of socially founded on queer notions of love without mastery. I argue that this is not true, or rather that there are intricacies that need to be challenged before. Specifically, I argue that romantic love is preoccupied with the assimilation of otherness into the self only in the hegemonic understanding of it. Indeed, romantic love has to be reciprocated, and this is an end state that relationships with non-humans are devoid of. Yet it is not reciprocity in and of itself that makes romantic love goal-oriented, but the digitality we try to attribute to it. I understand digitality in terms of Tompkins' affect theory. This means that we recognize reciprocation as a two-way situation. Our love is either reciprocated or not. If it is, then we expect our relationship to the other person to be a complete blissful union that will provide us with the utmost satisfaction. If it is not reciprocated, then we are in despair and agony, evoking divine and cosmic powers alike to intervene and make our beloved want us back. This is because we are conditioned to anticipate love as the bearer of meaning and fulfillment to our existence. This is the part of romantic love that makes it goal-oriented and a win or lose scenario. But love is not like that to begin with. Love is analog. It can take many forms and encompasses many experiences, many perceptions. It is communication and dialogue and accepting that the other cannot be assimilated, that they will always remain distinct, and this is why we love them. We love them not because they cannot reciprocate, but because they can, and they're free to do it in the manner they understand and which will forever elude us. So while digital games may appear to force digitality on love due to their medium specificity and thus strip it from authenticity, love in the popular and dominant paradigm is already infused with digitality, or at least the promise of digitality, since actual love does not work like that. In this manner, I argue that since we're conditioned to perceive love already as digital, then digital games are the prime medium to offer this manipulated version of it, a love that is an end state of reciprocation and satisfaction. So before asking of games to do something that no other medium is required to do, namely afford reciprocation to their human players, should we not first see if they can do what other media can do, as in include love as representation and not an actual experience? And before condemning this representation of reciprocation as a fictitious narrative of self-absorption and narcissism, should we not first understand where its need derives from? Should we simply penalize the desires of those who want to be Cinderellas and Sir Lancelots? As aforementioned, games are able to offer these desires to their players because these desires are already manipulated to respond to digitality and codification. In actuality, I argue that this is the most crucial potential of games as critical texts. Indeed, games that invite a queer playfulness that makes possible the dream of loving relationships between humans and non-humans without assimilating otherness into frameworks of the known, as Gatti argues, I argue instead that games are most successful at deconstructing their apt understanding of love as the promise of reciprocity exactly when they offer it. It is when humans cannot but experience love's constructed digitality that they recognize its limitations and the dissatisfaction that it entails. Games can afford love as a codified representation thereof, which I understand as romance. They may not be able to afford love because it demands agents that can reciprocate it, but they can afford romance because romance is a constructed representation of love. While digital games as a medium still entail the potential to offer love, if certain technological limitations and medium preconceptions are overcome, and love as free-form playfulness as discussed above, they can also offer love as fantasy. Games have been rightly criticized for perpetuating problematic and sexist stereotypes when it comes to love. Nonetheless, this is a matter of style and design, so it can be improved. However, fixing problematic elements of fantasy and uprooting the need for it, even if in itself is problematic, are not equal challenges and therefore demand different approaches. In other media, the distinction between love as representation and love as experience is clear. When I read a romance novel like Pride and Prejudice, I do not fall in love myself. Instead, I read about a love story between two fictional characters, Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth. Equally, when I watch a movie adaptation of the same novel, I witness a love story as a spectator. While it is true that my emotional state is affected by the events that transpire in the fictional setting of the movie and the novel, respectively, my feelings are not the same with those experienced when I fall in love in my primary life. This discrepancy does not mean that neither novel nor movie are able to afford love. They include love as representation. Even if my experience of reading the novel or watching the movie does not match my experience of falling in love, I'm still affected by the love story that unfolds before me. Saying that a novel or a movie or a work of art, for that matter, cannot portray love as long as they cannot make the audience feel as they fall in love, as even they have fallen in love, is a preposterous expectation. So why should we require such a thing from games? Indeed, in games, things get more complicated because the player's engagement with the game is not imaginary anymore, but extraneumatic. If I would play a Pride and Prejudice-inspired game, I would no longer be a distinct observer, but part of the action. This immediately turns my passive consumption of a love story into an active involvement within a love story. Does this mean that my experience in a game should be the same with when I fall in love? If it is not, then does this mean that games cannot afford love? I argue that this is not the case. Games are able to afford love if love in this context is not understood as my falling in love, but as a lived representation of a love story. This understandably changes the experience of the love story in the same way that my reading Pride and Prejudice and watching it as a movie are different experiences. Whether games afford love and whether human players fall in love with computer-generated characters are therefore two separate, albeit connected questions. When one examines love in games as part of player experience, they should be careful of the distinction and aware as to what point they address. Loving in a game and romancing in a game are two separate experiences. Love may indeed be impervious to quantification, planning, and strategizing, but romance is not. Romance is a designed experience, and its pleasure resides in its ability to be highly codified. In particular, we enjoy consuming romantic texts, in whatever form, exactly because they constitute a fantasy of procedural love. In that, romance as a genre and game experience fits perfectly with the algorithmic nature of games. Romance requires codification and a predetermined outcome. This ontological differentiation allows games to successfully include romantic content without the requirement that players fall in love. Moreover, this discrepancy is not useful only in games. Our experience of love is informed by the experience of its representation. Thus, conceptualizing the difference between love and romance helps us to discern our experience of actually falling in love. This concerns not only games, but our cultural paradigm as we know it. In games, this demarcation between love and romance becomes as evident as ever, which accentuates the revider's text of critical analysis. When it comes to love, its experience and its expression are so closely interlinked that it's difficult to discern the two. The complexity of love as an experience and representation can also be witnessed in the work of psychologist Paul Ekman. Ekman's major contribution is his study of basic human emotions. Notably for Ekman, love is not considered a basic emotion. Love is a high-level experience that incorporates many more affective states and lasts for much longer than a basic emotion. In actuality, love is not an emotion at all, but rather a conglomeration of affective states. Happiness, elation, jealousy, anger, spite, agony, fear, depression, among others. The complexity of love increases one takes into consideration another category discussed by Ekman, that of emotional plots. Ekman includes grief, jealousy, and infatuation among these. Quote, jealousy is an emotional plot. It tells us the cast of three, their roles, something about the past history, and the emotions its cast member is likely to feel. Anger may be felt by the spurned one, but sadness and fear may also be felt. We also know something about the feelings of the rival and the object of mutual attention. An emotional plot contains much more specific information than do any of the basic emotions. End of quote. Ekman does not talk about love as an emotional plot, but looking at the above example, we might assume that it is one. It is more specific and at the same time more complicated than sexual desire, friendship, and/or joy. It concerns at least two actors, and it carries information about what has transpired, two people met, and at least one of them was attracted to the other, and what will transpire. If love is reciprocated, the person in love will be elated, filled with pleasure and satisfaction. If love is rejected, they will be devastated and grieved. Love is actually a facilitator of many emotional plots. We become subject to emotions exactly because we're in love. We get jealous, angry, sad, happy, while in due to our quality as someone in love. A jealous lover is a different emotional plot from a jealous co-worker. Already the inclusion of the word lover organizes the premise of the story. The opposite is also true. Since love is a complex, high-level experience, the effect of specific emotional plots on us can notify us of our emotional predisposition, which is love. We may realize we love someone because we get jealous when they give their attention to someone else, for example, or if we get sad when we miss them. As it seems, we become aware of love due to emotional plotting. It would then not be too excessive to argue that love always entails an element of representation. As there is not an unambiguous way to know if and how the other person loves us, we try to discern it or sustain the illusion that we know from how they act and the way we interpret their performed behavior. At the same time, we're also aware of being in love through complex cognitive and psychological processes and/or emotional plots. In that, love becomes a constructed experience in itself, dependent on our biology, but highly influenced by our social discourse. This does not mean that love as an experience is the same with the experience of love as represented in the media, games included, but it already shows how the two become convoluted. In accordance with the theory of emotions, the discrepancy between love and romance is positioned in more positive terms. While love always brings along an uncertainty, part of its effect is based on our trying to discern it, both in ourselves and others. In representations of love, the feelings are given. They're recreated for us, and we can share them by proxy with the characters that are engaged in the love story. Our feelings can indeed be triggered by narrative as much as by a reality. As Ekman points out, quote, often in civilized life, our emotions occur in response to words, not actions, to events which are complex and indirect, end of quote. To that, he also argues that, quote, people do choose to put themselves in situations in which an emotion is likely to occur, arranging circumstances known to be likely to bring on the emotion, end of quote. The feelings we have when we experience a love representation by reading it, watching it, or executing it are not the same with the feelings we have when we live love. But by being so conditioned on representation, love also becomes subject to it. More precisely, the representations of love manifest novel emotions, emotions that are associated with love but take a presence of their own. A masterful poem about love elicits emotions to its reader that they may never experience while actually being in love, or they may do exactly because they have first read this poem about love. Romance, by being so formulaic, constitutes a separate experience of emotions. While love is more complex and freeform, romance is very structured and culturally situated. It creates emotions of excitement, pleasure, joy, and infatuation, among others, which are specific to romance and achieved through its appropriate codification. In romance, the feelings of love are given, but love cannot be felt, but only in its ambivalence and ambiguity. As Laurent Berland has argued, this uncertainty can be exhausting. Living and loving in ambivalence is a constant struggle. This is why romance has been cultivated as love's fantasy for stability of desire, a practice which for Berland has a primarily political extension as it is supported by the institutions of hegemonic power. Berland argues that love is always the fantasy of desire for stability and anchored attachment as these are made accessible through language. In that, Berland sees love as an unattainable end state and at the same time as a means of hegemonic appropriation and normalization of desire. For Berland, fantasy conditions and shapes the subject and the self as part of society. Persons find their form, their selves from within fantasy, they argue, which includes the projection of impossible desires onto love objects for a bearable and prior stability and the mediation of norms that make them socially intelligible. End of quote. This makes attachment even more political. The reason for that comes from how Berland describes the construction of subjectivity in this experience of desire. Quote, the centrality of repetition to pleasure and of deferral to desire indeed places the desiring subject in her story, as well as makes her reader of her story. These two forms, acting and interpretation, enable the desiring subject to re-inhabit her own plot from a number of imaginary vantage points simultaneously. End of quote. In avatarial games in which the player both acts and see themselves acting, the workings of this encounter with the fantasy, which is what love is in the popular and psychoanalytical paradigm, are even more enabled and prominent. Daniel Vella has written predominantly on the dynamic relationship of the player with the playable figure, as entailing both subjective and objective relations. For Vella, the connection of the player with the avatar is that of both self and the other, creating a double consciousness, as he calls it. Vella differentiates between an objective mode of playing, in which the player perceives the avatar as a distinct body, and the subjective mode, in which the player inhabits the avatar body themselves. Quote, the distinction is one of playing the figure versus playing with the figure. In the subjective mode, the player becomes the figure. In the objective mode, conversely, the figure becomes itself present to the player as an object of perception. To summarize, the playable figure has a double nature. It is both a manifestation of the player and also at the same time a distinct individual, a character with its own attributes and characteristics that set it apart from the player. End of quote. Indeed, while in literature, cinema, and other media, the participation of the receiver is fictional and or imagined, in games, the participation is very much real and somatic. This brings desire and the pleasure of its representation much more to the forefront in comparison to the fantastical outcome of love. As I argue, the prime reason that including love in games raises concerns is because we do not want to see how fictional and constructed what we have come to know as love is. If we can play love, then what is left for us to depend our salvation on? Yet instead of fear, love in games should inspire hope. It is a means to understand the difference between experiencing love and experiencing the romance. This quality of games may facilitate our accepting love's ambivalence while retaining the pleasure and limited satisfaction that romance can offer, without, however, confusing the two. When we as Mario go to save Princess Peach, we watch ourselves fighting for love, but we also have to actually fight, overcome obstacles in the shape of evil mushrooms and turtles, pits of lava, deadly spikes, and fire-spitting flowers. In that, we can actually feel what it means to reach the fantastical end, which is the promise of love's stability. In games, the absurdity of this fictionality is more pronounced because they constitute condensed and designed lived experiences. It is not that their codification corrupts love, it is rather that it shows how prone love is to codification and how constructed and fabricated romantic love is as an experience. In the book The Magicians by Lev Grossman, A group of young adults visits a fantasy world which purposefully resembles Narnia and other fantastical realms like Middle-earth and Hogwarts. The world, called Fillory, is a fictional recreation of a renowned author in the book's fictional setting. All the characters of the magicians have read about Fillory, and when they discover that it exists and they can actually visit it, they're understandably astonished. More so because the way to reach it is as easy as the turn of a button. Apparently, at the end of the fictional book series, the protagonists are gifted with 5 buttons that can transfer them from Earth to this fantasy world whenever they want, whereas before they had no way of knowing when and how to travel there. They had to be chosen to visit Fillory. As Penny, one of the characters in Grossman's book, explains, this diminished all the appeal of the adventure and by extension of Fillory. This is why the buttons had to be hidden. This is a quote from the book. But the most important point, Penny said, is that at the end of the Wandering Dune, Helen hid all the buttons somewhere in her aunt's house in Cornwall. She felt they were too mechanical. They made the journey too easy. Their power was wrong. You shouldn't be able to just go to Fillory whenever you wanted, like catching a bass, she argued. A trip to Fillory had to be earned. That had always been the way. It was a reward for the worthy, bestowed by the ram gods Ember and Amber. The buttons were a perversion of this divine grace, a usurping of it. They broke the rules. Ember and Amber couldn't control them. Fillory was fundamentally a religious fantasy, but the buttons weren't religious at all. They were magical. They were just tools with no values attached. You could use them for anything you wanted, good or evil. They were so magical, they were practically technological. Digital games are the technological buttons to love's religious quality. They make the journey and the goal accessible at will and thus undress it of pretense and value. Or rather, they show that the value is not inherent in the end state, love or the magic realm. Instead, it is the struggle to reach it that gives value to love and Fillory both, a religious value that is. In other media, the struggle can be mystified. We do not know why, when, and how Beauty fell in love with the Beast. We do not know the exact workings of the filter that made Isolde fall in love with Tristan. We do not know why the prince loved Cinderella. More often than not, the narrative describes it as magic, an inexplicable power, platitudinous beauty, or a good heart in a futile attempt to give words to the ineffable. In games, it is the way there that gets demystified. You press the buttons and you make it happen. It is still difficult, depending on the game, but it is achievable and quantifiable. Since what gives love its singularity as the remedy to our existential agony is the struggle to attain and express it, when games remove the struggle or make it successional and solvable, they supposedly remove love's merit. Yet as we saw, this merit is a fictional one. The feeling and experience of love do exist without this religious aura. I do not equate the two. At the same time, I strongly argue that this understanding of love as the redeemer of a traumatic existence is so prevalent and persistent that it has affected how we experience and expect to experience love. The fact that games are a means to highlight this conventionality and demystify love, maybe that's a way to overcome the hegemonic dictum of love, to separate once more love from romance. Can games then uproot our need for love as fantasy? Understandably, this cannot be the result of our engagement with a single medium, and I did not argue that. Instead, I contend that games, by exhibiting and accentuating this fantasy's fictionality, bear its pretense, and in this way, they can help us reject it. In games, we do not imagine anymore what it would feel like to have love as a stability of desire. We actually feel it. In this, we can experience what this fantasy entails and realize that it does not compare. It is not love because love is devoid of any stability. We feel love because we are uncertain of the outcome. When we are sure, then we cannot love. We can have other feelings of pleasure, elation, satisfaction, but not love. This does not efface the importance of romance as a valid emotional plot. As with our pets, sometimes we want to be emotionally manipulated. It is an act of self-care. It can have positive effects on our psychology. This is something that games can offer. Yet they can offer something more transgressive than that. Playing the romance helps with our understanding of its position to love, but the two are different, albeit connected experiences, one manipulated and controlled, thus satisfactory, the other free and ambivalent, thus powerful. In this way, games do not provide novel conceptualizations of love, for now, but instead allow us to leave the hegemonic but learned imagining of it and realize that it is not actually love. This does not by default lead to our rejecting the romance. For various political, social, and personal reasons, we may still prefer sometimes the secure satisfaction of romance compared to love's bittersweet disposition. But at least we're more informed and conscious of our choice. In this way, the stability of romance becomes one of the options and stops being a hegemonic paradigm, while by playing it, we're able to relearn what love is. To conclude, I understand love as representation as a matter of romance, a coded and designed realization of love, that is. Romance has different affordances and involves different emotional reactions compared to love. While in other media, romance is imagined or perceived, in games it is lived due to the specificities of the medium. This, however, does not stop it from being a representation. This is an essential demarcation that I argue should be taken into account when analyzing love in games, especially when it is considered as an aspect of player experience. If it does not, it may result in false assumptions and conclusions, most notably that digital games cannot afford love. Truly, they cannot, but they do afford romance, and this is a crucial difference. I argue that while games can afford the representation of love, the feelings the player experiences are not love, since they come into contact with agents that cannot love them back. In these games show the limitations of love as fantasy, not only within the medium, but outside the medium as well, in other representations of love and the love canon in general. Digital games exemplify the problematisation around love's discourse, even if they do not lexicalize love. Instead, they invite us to rethink what it means to lexicalize love in the first place, and to reflect on how this practice affects our own experience of falling in love. For this reason, games constitute the appropriate critical text to theorize the experience of love as no other medium before them. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you, Renata, very much for the brilliant talk. I think it was really nice. And yeah, I think it's time for asking you questions. And please use the function of raising your hand so that there wouldn't be such a mess that everybody talks at the same time. Yeah, please, who would love to be first? Yeah, I see Leonid and then Maxim. Leonid, please.
I actually think there were some people before me, but very small proposition. I may have some more questions later, but for now, first of all, thank you very much. And second, can you and maybe our, sorry, I forgot English. Oh my God, our presenters in the future, maybe they can post their presentations as a downloadable file, because to be honest, it was very, very hard to, type down all the citations I wanted to remember. So maybe I would prefer to just copy paste them from your great work. Thank you very much. And I think we shall, make this as standard as possible, if it will be okay with our other presenters. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think I now have disabled the function of everybody to make their posts in the group, but I think it is possible for Renata to share with me the slides, and then I will post it there if you don't mind.
Yes, of course. No, not at all.
So yes, yeah, Leonid. So that was it, or only about the slides, right?
Maybe after I will remember some more English words, I will be able to ask another questions. But since I've slept today for 4 hours, it may take some time. So just go ahead.
Okay. Well, then Maxim was the next one.
Okay. Thank you for the presentation. You see, like, for the whole length of it, I just couldn't help, thinking about some distinction which I always make whenever talking about emotions and all other kinds of things. Like, for example, I have this teapot, and for example, if it if it gets cold like really, really fast, I can hate it. I hate this damn thing, and everyone will understand what I mean, right? But I cannot say I have a feud with it, right? Because that would have been insane. So again, I could say that I really love this thing, but I cannot say that I have a romantic relationship with it, because again, that would have been insane. Because like all people think like, oh, well, it requires some reciprocity, right? And if it cannot love me back, then it's not a romantic relationship, and so on and so forth. Well, you see, so these things are like always different, or at least it seems so. And sometimes I think that one can get in the way of the other. So, for example, sometimes it is easier to love distant people or even dead people, because now they cannot resist your love. For example, now they always listen to you, now that they are, bodies in the graves or just sweet memories of themselves, and so on and so on. So they cannot resist your love. You can, they cannot change for the worse, right? So they cannot disappoint you anymore, and so on and so forth. So this is why it is sometimes easier to love your long dead relatives or God, or it's easier to love them than to love your the close ones, the people you have conversations with. So and in my opinion, sometimes games do some really, really strange thing. In my opinion, they usually just fake reciprocity, instead of actually doing anything which could even sometimes it resembles reciprocity, kind of resembles reciprocity. And I just want to know your thoughts about this, because as far as I think it wasn't covered in your presentation, and I'm really, really interested in listening to your thoughts on that subject. Thank you.
Yes, no, that's a very good point, actually, because I didn't have the time to go there. But another part of my research is exactly how games enable this connection with NPCs, which at the end of the day, as you also said, it's not love because it doesn't have reciprocation, but it has this appearance of reciprocation through their design. And most of the times games try to do that through dialogue trees and cutscenes. So when they move the power and the agency and the control away from the player, when they impose certain emotional plots on their narrative. And I think there are many reasons why they try to do that. I think one of the most prominent ones is that romance doesn't get the amount or space that other game mechanics get, for example, fighting. So players have the time and space to kill, loot, and discover new areas much more than they have to engage in relationships with the NPCs, because it is a design practice that affects the whole medium and the whole industry. But that being said, I'm a strong believer that with our current technological level, reciprocity will never be achieved, because the characters will forever be designed and scripted. My opinion is that AI is the way to go there, because if we have agents that are actually able to acknowledge us and choose to love us back, this is the only way that the reciprocation can be achieved. For example, we have in Shadow of War and Shadow of Mordor, we have the Nemesis system, which of course is a system about orcs, which are the antagonists of the game. But they're procedurally generated, and they have an AI that allows them to recognize the player, so they can form personal and specific relations with the player as part of their playthrough. If something like that would be available for romance and romantic relationships in games, I think it would only benefit the experience of love in games in terms of reciprocation. So yeah.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Maxim, for the question. And yeah, so we still have three other questions. Yes, since we started a little bit later, I think we still have some time for this Q&A section. So Ksenia Zhernova has raised her hand, so please make your question.
Yes, hello. Thank you for the talk. I have two questions if we have a time. First of all, I would like to know, you said in your talk that you can't fall in love with the character because he won't love you back. Am I right?
Yes.
But what about falling in love with someone who doesn't love you back in real life? This is possible, so why won't it work in the game?
Mm-hmm. Because unlike the character in the game, the person in your real life can love you back, but they don't. But the character in the game cannot love you back. So it's not part of, if it's not part of their design, they cannot do it. So it's not a matter of unrequiredness, as I said, but of reciprocation as a matter of potentiality. That's how I demarcate the two.
Okay, so it's the possibility of the person to love you back, which, okay, thank you. And also I have another question. You talk about that we as players could feel emotionally attached to the characters. I also think so, but from the psychological approach, I haven't seen many research on that theme. So could you please be more specific why we are able to fall, not fall in love, to be emotionally attached to the characters while we understand that they are not real?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yes, so that's a very good question. I touched a bit upon it when I explained how our love relationship works with pets, because they're also not human, but we can still love them because
but they're real.
Sorry?
But they're real, like we know that they are real life beings.
Yes. But our perception, research has shown, for example, very prominently, it's a paper by Morrison and Zimke, if you want to check it out, that tells specifically how our perception does not differentiate between materialities. So basically what happens is that we understand differently the space and the agents that are close to us, or in embodied perception terms, the agents that are in our peripersonal space, the space we can control. And this space in games gets extended even though the materiality is different. So in a space where we can act and in which we can perform actions and have reactions and have interactions, the agents that share this environment with us are understood by our perception, even though they're not real. So this is a matter of effect and not cognition anymore, as much real as physical agents. So even though there are still some differences as a matter of degree, as a matter of mode, there are no differences. We still perceive them as anthropomorphic. And this is something we tend to do with everything. We anthropomorphize everything because this is how we understand and perceive the world around us. It's a survival mechanism. We need to attribute characteristics to other agents that we share, so to be able to understand their intentions and be aware and anticipate them. And of course, the design helps a lot, because the more anthropomorphic these agents are and the more attributes they have close to ours, the more our perception of them as embodied agents is increased. But it is already there. We already attach ourselves to them in the same way that we do in our physical world.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, unfortunately, Yeah, I see there are really many questions. I think we still have some time for questions by Pavel Zemtsov and Olli, for sure. And then we'll see if we have time for questions in the chat room. So Pavel, there was a question by you.
Thank you. Thank you for a good presentation, and I will try to struggle with my English too. First of all, there were two examples in the beginning of your presentation, very good examples, I think, Heavy Rain and Walking Dead, because I had, as a gamer, the same feelings about these characters. So I didn't have any feeling to Sean and have too much feelings about, to Clementine, really. But my question is about the name of this feeling. Why you decided to call it love or romance, but not empathy?
Mm-hmm. Actually, I didn't specify it then. It was more of a description rather than a definition. Because, no, first of all, this wasn't a romantic love about Clementine or Shaw. I thought they were children. No, if anything, it was love as a parental love. I felt I wanted to protect Clementine for sure. Sean, not so much, but Clementine for sure. I wanted to protect her. So yeah, empathy can also come into the discussion. I avoid using it because, first of all, it is ambiguous and contested in terms of psychology, and also because more often than not, it shows how it implies a fictional representation of a feeling that I understand as something another player would feel, instead of acknowledging feelings that I possess of my own. And I think in games, exactly because, as I said, using Daniel Velas, the player figure model, even though there is a separate character, I was controlling Lee, I'm still part of the experience because, as I said, I control it and it becomes part of my space. So this is why I wanted to avoid using this word.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So yeah, thank you, Pavel. And I think the last question, because we still have 3 other small presentations. The last question by Olli Tapio-Leino.
Hello, can you hear me all right? My microphone is different than usual. Thank you, Renata, for the presentation, really thought-provoking. I like your duality of how games can afford love, that being a different question about what games can teach us about love. And I also like your idea of romance as codified love. And it reminded me of this quote in the Woody Allen movie, Vicky Cristina Barcelona, where there was this character, Juan Antonio, played by the Javier Bardem, who says that Maria Elena used to say that only unfulfilled love can be romantic. And it's a quote that has stuck with me ever since. And in this connection, I was wondering whether it would be possible to explore the possibility of there being a genuine experience of genuine love in games, with the condition that we might be able to a little bit stretch the notion of love as we know it. Like Descartes used to say that love is the desire to be with the beloved. No commitments to the ontology of the beloved. Whatever is beloved, then desire to be with that one. So the genuine love experience is being like a non-empathetic emotion, not dependent on willing suspension of disbelief. Perhaps something akin to like forgetting that ontological divide that you mentioned, that we can never touch the object of our love. We can never show our feelings and they will never reciprocate. And I was reminded of Marta Matilda Kania, who took the solution of talking about games and bad faith. Perhaps we could talk about love and bad faith. Or then I was also reminded of Emmanuel Levinas, who talks about, I don't know how to pronounce that French name, Levinas, maybe, how he talked about the nourishment, eating the bread. It's not, the nourishment is not really about the bread, but it's about how the act of nourishment nourishes itself. It's as much about the enjoyment as it is about the object of the enjoyment. So I guess in this case, loving a game character is not about the game character, but loving the feelings of loving. And this would sort of get us off the hook regarding the problem of lack of reciprocation. But on the other hand, it would render the avatar as the kind of the third wheel. My own experience of falling in love with Rose of Sharon Cassidy in Fallout New Vegas. But she makes it clear in the beginning, she says, I know your type, you are a player. But the only way out is to either treat it as this sort of Levinas, like loving the feeling itself, or then say it's all in bad faith. I wonder, what do you think? Is it possible, if we sort of are willing to stretch the notion of love, is it possible to have a genuine experience of love? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your question. I was able to follow your question because I've read your excellent chapter on your experience from Las Vegas and the concept of love and bad faith. And in my opinion, we can experience love in games, but only if we consider it as a romantic representation. So I believe that, and I strongly argue that exactly because of that, games are very good as critical texts to also unpack and to construct all these thoughts about love that is only subject-oriented. Exactly because when you actually have that in games, you understand that no, it is not genuine love. It is something that we may, from a privileged and entitled point, think of as love, because for many, and I tended to avoid that in my talk, but it's almost unavoidable to bring gender into that. Most of the times it is men who say that it is my feelings that count, and the object of my feelings, which more often than not are women, did not count. That it is this repetition of this entitled narrative, and I think games help with that, exactly because even though they put the player in a very privileged and entitled position, it's the only body that has agency basically in a single player game, of course, and they help us see how, even though there are still feelings and there is satisfaction, there is some disbelief, there is some narrative or fantasy of reciprocation, in actuality it is not love as we understand it in our primary physical world. We can call it something else. I call it romance, but it's not love. It's not that I disregard the need for it, because this is a whole different discourse, and it goes much deeper. But I think resisting the ambiguity of the two terms or of the two experiences is more beneficial to understanding player experience and love experience, rather than stretching the definition. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you, everybody. I'm sorry, but thank you again, Renata, for your great talk. And I think since it was so great, the audience has so many questions, but nevertheless, we still have 3 more short presentations for today. And I think we need now go on with it. And the first one the first presentation will be made by Mark Pashenko, who has a similar topic as yours, also connected to love, of course, as was planned. And his title is Love as Multiplicity and Subjectification in Disco Elysium. Mark, are you here with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah. Hello.
Should I start the screen sharing?
Yes, yeah, of course.
Okay.
You have 15 minutes for everything, so for your talk and for Q&A.
Yeah, all right. I'll try to fit. So, hello, my name is Mark. My presentation would be a kind of a case study of the recently popular narrative RPG Disco Elysium. which is heavily dialogue driven, and actually the dialogue window is the main interface through which the player interacts meaningfully with the game's world, both ludically within the logic of the gameplay and extra-ludically within the logic of the narrative. It is set in this kind of elaborated fictional universe in a dilapidated and impoverished, yet filled with many different histories and memories, district of the city of Revachol. And this world is permeated by many different traumas, historical traumas and personal traumas, which form this kind of very rich affective field. And in terms of this affective field of many different material artifacts and people and conversations, I would like to tackle the topic of love as a broader form of affectivity that is not confined to this anthropomorphic love or codified romance. And in the sense, I would like to maybe complement the and expand on certain topics raised by Renata just now. I think one of the most unique features of this game is its skill system. And its uniqueness is tied to the fact that each skill is represented as a certain distinct character with its own agenda, desire, sort of intentionality, because each skill participates in the conversations, in the dialogue of the game, as much as different characters and objects for which we interact with the world. So they participate in this affectivity that is delivered to us as the player through text. And in this sense, they are also, as we are as player, we can decide, we can redistribute skill points, we can use different modifiers, such as wearing different kinds of clothing. We can influence the presence of these skills and presence of affects that are connected to these skills by our player choices, and we can influence the certain type of personality or a style of communication, a style of affectivity that is expressed through the protagonist. So, for example, each skill has it influences the interaction in a sense that they chime in with different advices, or they give their perspectives. They comprise their internal monologue or perhaps polylogue of the protagonist. So the skill of physical instrument allows us to employ physical force to solve the problems, the gameplay and the narrative problems which we face, but also it nudges us to use more physically forceful ways to interact with actors in the world. And also all these skills react to affects that are located in the world. For example, the presence of different political divides and ideologies and subjectification in terms of these ideologies is one of the central themes of the game. And for example, the skill of endurance, which is effectively connected to feelings of health and able-bodiedness, can enter into this kind of affective resonance with the ideology of fascism, as it tries to as this ideology, this ideological machine is compatible with the and it positions itself as being compatible with this quasi-eugenic narratives of health and able-bodiedness and maybe some kind of genetic superiority and such and such. So here is a kind of maybe too complex and complicated scheme, but just a quick diagram to show how we as a player can participate in the process of subjectification of the protagonist. And actually, in the narrative sense, it is also a very, very important part of the game that we can change the personality and the subjectivity of our protagonists by choosing how he interacts with the world he's situated in. So, for example, he can adopt different political ideologies. He can become addicted to various substances that he encounters in the world. He can enter into different this kind of organizational and political affiliations with forces that are present in the game's conflicts. For example, he can cooperate with the local union that is involved in a labor dispute, or he can help a cryptozoologist to find a cryptid, a creature that is not recognized by science. So, and in the process, adopting this narrative of being in search of something unknown and such and such. Yeah, and through the game's narrative, all these effects are intertwined and they are produced and shown to us as a player through the in-game dialogue and through the events of the game. Here we are presented because there are many different drives, many different kind of actors which form a constantly shifting multiplicity of factors of subjectification. I argue that it is it is optimal to use the approach called schizoanalysis that is developed, of course, by Deleuze and Guattari in their book Anti-Oedipus, to analyze this kind of subject formation that is not tied to any closed symbolical system, such as, of course, the Oedipal complex, or maybe some kind of institutional allegiance, in a sense that we start playing as a officer of a citizen's militia, but we can choose whether to adopt this subjectivity of an officer, basically of a police officer, of a cop, by also choosing different options and, for example, developing or not developing the skills of authority, for example. And in this sense, skills and other kinds of gameplay elements, so sort of this kind of interfaces between the actors in the world, which can be seen as this kind of desiring machines that organize desire. And here we enter slowly the topic of love as a broader affectivity, because for schizoanalysis, desire and love and sexuality they exist in this kind of universal ontology of desire. They can be seen as desiring machines that we are witness to through the game's text and through the personality of the protagonist, but that are yet multiplicitous and can exist in many different areas. So, for example, political, historical, some bodily feelings and affects, and etc., etc. So some more schizoanalytic takes on love. So talking about escaping this kind of closed symbolical systems, love is presented not as interaction of predefined singular entities, this kind of closed systems which are paired with each other, but this kind of an ever-expanding orchestra of many different experiences and affects, and I think we can also draw a connection here to focusing on the affect and the emotion itself, as told by Levinas, rather than the subjects that experience it, and rather than the symbolic systems that the subjects constitute to codify love and to make it into romance. So Deleuze and Guattari talk about forms of love that exist far beyond anthropomorphic representation, and that involve not only the subjects, the codified subjects, but many different experiences and histories and material artifacts, which are all can be seen as this kind of desiring machines which produce desire. So finally, talking about the contents of the game, I argue that Discalusm presents this kind of two poles of love, which can also be correspondent to, I think, the concepts of romance and love. Romance as codified love, because in the game we are faced with the fact that some time ago there existed a historical figure, an almost godlike historical figure of Dolores Day, this kind of very distant woman, who was crowned as an almost religious, ultimate religious authority, and the game tells us that at that time we all, and I'm quoting, we all fell in love with her, with this kind of symbolic fixation. And also the game presents us with a situation that we as a protagonist are trying to deal with the trauma of a woman that left us, of a failed love and the failed romance. And in the game, these two figures are meshed up, and we are slowly encountering the reality that we are traumatized by this figure. And it is important to consider that we are traumatized by the figure, by this codified subject, by the symbol, and not by the woman as a subject herself, because we like she appears in the fantasies and the dreams of the protagonist, but it exists. She exists only as this kind of remnant, a symbolic remnant that is devoid of all love, of this kind of reciprocal interactivity. And so the alternative that I argue the game delivers through its gameplay and through this structure of this affective field that is reminiscent of schizoanalytic descriptions, is this kind of chaotic, non-anthropomorphic love that can happen between any kinds of desiring machines, any kinds of actors, and in which we can participate, even if we are not reproducing any kinds of anthropomorphic figures, even if we are not fixated on any kind of symbolic systems, and I think it can give us. I think a good example is I think I will finish with it to not take too much time. A good example is the moment in the game where we can, through the skill, so-called skills shivers, which allows us to tune into the city and interact with the city as if it were a living being, so a completely non-human entity. There is a moment in the game where we can enter into a direct conversation with the city, which tells us that it loves us actually as a non-human entity. So there's this kind of moment of in-game narrative of reciprocity, even from a non-human entity, and that it counts on us, and that the important thing is that through this kind of non-human interface, effective interface of the shivers skill, we are able to escape our traumas and our fixations, which are more anthropomorphic, which are non-reciprocal, and which reference us to the romance as love that is failed from the very beginning. yes, I think I will end on this point. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Mark. Yeah, we don't have a lot of time for questions, but just 2 minutes we have. So maybe there are some questions by anybody. Oli, do you want to make a do you want to ask a question, or your hand?
Oh, apologies, I forgot to take my hand down, but I rather thank Mark for a very interesting talk. But I have no question, thank you.
So maybe somebody else. I don't see your hands right now. Yeah. So thank you, Mark. I think I would ask a question. So basically, you think what would be your reaction in general to the talk made by Renata before? How do you interpret the game after all? Is that only I mean, how do those terms as romantic love, romance in descriptism correlate with desire understood in Deleuze-Guattarian terms? I mean, how would you what is the correlation between romance understood as in the talk by Renata with your own terms that you are using to analyze?
Yeah. I think I understood your question. So in Anti-Oedipus, Deleuze and Guattari, they outline these two poles of desire by which desire can be structured and organized, the paranoid and the schizophrenic poles, and they, in the context of this book, they have very specific meanings. So to try to quickly describe their meaning, the paranoid principle creates closed representational principles in a sense that it is always about some kind of fixation, some kind of mania to organize everything into a closed regime of signs. And in this sense, romance as a kind of closed narrative, as a kind of the regime of signs that represents love but does not necessarily contain it, I think can be attributed to this regime of desire that is called paranoid by Deleuze and Guattari. And in this sense, if we want to maybe look for an alternative to non-reciprocal forms of desire, we could maybe look into the other pole that is characterized as schizophrenic, in the sense that it is always about some kind of escape from the regime of signs and some kind of search for new opportunities to express our affects and to enter into new affective configurations. So in a sense, with the characters in the video game, for example, this kind of Deleuze-Guattarian schizo-revolutionary approach would be emancipatory approach, would be to try to find new affects for us, maybe as a player or even as a game designer, of love and of desire and of libido that would escape this kind of predetermined narratives and this kind of pre-established situations and ludic situations that are the results of a game being a finished digital product So the examples with AI, I think, are suitable here, and also with maybe some kind of asynchronous multiplayer mechanics, where the behavior of NPCs may be influenced by choices of other players. So it creates this kind of hybrids, behavioral hybrids between algorithmic entities and living humans. So the point is to find new forms of digital effectivity.
Yeah, thank you. I got it. I think that was a nice idea in the end that you pointed out. Yeah, I'm sorry, but we need to move forward. So thank you again, Mark. Sorry, yeah, this reaction. And now there will be two more presentations for today. The next one is Daria Byneva, will be made by Daria Byneva, whose topic is love with non-humans. So please, Daria.
Thank you very much. I'm very glad to participate in this event, and many thanks to Renata. It was a very impressive presentation and thoughts, and I really can only to follow some of the ideas, because there are many of ideas here, and actually I want to speak about only some of them, and actually about some examples of what we can present as example of emotional relationship with non-human, and maybe sympathy to non-human. There are actually some questions, some discussion after Renata's presentation, and I want to begin with some example. For example, this game, Middle Shadow of War, and maybe it's a strange example of when we speak about love or something like this, but here we can see some form of articles that was presented by player that is also the editor of magazine, that say about his experience in this game. And actually not only he, but many other players, they said that they have some form of sympathy, of emotional reaction on this non-player characters, these enemies, orcs. And why we speak that? Actually here in these articles you can see that our author said that I love him, I hope I have the strength to let him go. And it's connected. I actually have no time to discuss all the events of the game, but these characters have some unique characteristics. They have personalities and even have a memory. They could recall the main hero about the previous experience, that they have had some form of interaction, and they so maybe it was one of these characters that influence on this emotional reaction on this characteristic. But actually I decided not to speak about games, but speak about artificial intelligence, that really has very big influence on our life. And here, I'm sorry that it's in Russian, but here there are some news that was not far ago that said that that sounds as artificial intelligence has done something, that he has make a new medicine for coronavirus, that now he could help in university. It has his own image in advertising, that when it's using that people use it in their advertising, they say that yes, now we have artificial intelligence and it will help, or maybe not it, but he or she. There are many, for many years actually, already we have many movies that represent some form of romantic intimate relationship with robot with artificial intelligence. In many countries now there are, and for one example, yes, we have the new movie about Blade Runner, that where the topic of romantic that actually had been in the first movie, but now it's much more highlighted and became one of the most important topics about the relationship between non-human, about love, about even children and something else. Actually, I want to tell that now there are around us there are many virtual creatures, simulacra, that has no any had no any real representative in our world, and voice assistant board, yes, game characters, and many others that influence in our life. And actually it becomes more and more difficult to understand if we really interact with person or virtual character, because as Renata said, that yes, we know that it's virtual characters, she or he cannot have laugh with us or something like this, but actually sometimes we don't know even with whom we speak. Now it's not actually it's not a very common situation, but for example, for children it can be. It's actually we have some research about children. I want to speak about this, but not now. Yes, that we actually understand it a little bit in another way that the adult people we have more serious way. For example, one of the I think that the most of cut-edge technology, theorise, self-learning bot, Microsoft China, and it has, in addition to semantic coding, the standard intention, she could evaluate the user emotion state and react in such a way. She has not only answer in the way that is very appropriate in this case, but also she understands what emotion you really could feel in this situation. And in the actually in the right side, you can see that her comment, for example, for photographs is not only reaction about the content of these photographs, but also the reaction on the emotional state of this post. Actually, for what purpose people post this photographs, not only about the content. And actually she has a very emotional bond with its million followers, and many young people fall in love in such bots, and in such bots, or for example for or for example for this virtual idols or something like this. Here we can see advertise, and then shows us how virtual assistant could help us in our emotion state, where how she is glad to see her master, how they interact. You can see
there must be some video.
Yes, actually, we can see that it's not about yes, virtual assistant that could help us to at some make some works or something like this. Not, it's about emotional states. No, actually there are some, some prediction that the first human-robot marriage will take place, and yes, actually there are some examples that of this intimate relationship between robots and humans. But I wanted to add, I understand that my time is almost over, and I wanted to add that there are some examples that is much more closer, because I understand that marriage with robot is something very this time is very unusual and strange for freaks or something like this. But if you say it about a digital ghost or digital zombie, that is much more closer to us, because there are many more a project that helps people to interact with people with relatives that die, and it could be in form of communication or even in form of virtual presentation, and it's much closer to our relationship with the romantic relationship, because it can represent our real people that now they are not with us, but so we could interact with us, and we could have romantic relationship with them. And now I want to say that we know that artificial intelligence has many now becoming more and more intellectually complex, and now the limited relationship becomes a new type of testing ground for artificial intelligence. If it really could be it could have emotional, romantic relationship with people. Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you, Daria. Thank you a lot. Are there questions by? I'm sorry. Are there any questions by any of yours? Yeah, I see Ksenia is willing to ask.
Yes. Hello again. I have an addition and a question. As far as I know, there is one case where the artificial intellect, if I remember, got the citizenship of some city. And also, I remember this recent documentary about the artificial intelligence. It's called How Far is Too Far, where the scientist is inventing some of the AI, and he talks about that his project, that it's a she, and she's learning like his own daughter, like she has the same emotional reactions, that AI has some kind of a brain that works in the way as a human brain, and has some like our neuron connections, that's some kind of a neuron AI connections. So it's literally like a human child. It acts like the one. It thinks like the one, and it learns exactly like the one. So it's basically just a copy of the human's brain. So my question is, we are really getting closer to create the artificial life that literally could feel and maybe be like real life. So are there any ethical research on this theme? Because I think that this question could be important in a matter of few years.
Thank you very much, Ksenia. Actually, there are many research about ethics of AI, and maybe it's a little bit, for my opinion, it's a little bit old-fashioned. That it's just about that Ksenia says, about the artificial intelligence that acts and looks like human. But if we really research the artificial intelligence now, we can see that it doesn't look and act as human. It's absolutely different. And our actually, as our philosophers and psychologists and ethics and something like this, many researchers, they actually think about ethics from the point of view of human. But I think that we need have another point of view, because it's not like human. It's something. It's something very different from human. Well, I don't more, because it's very, very important, but a very long question to discussion, maybe later.
Okay, yes, thank you.
Thank you.
So, yeah, thank you, Ksenia, and Renata, you also wanted to ask a question, right?
Yes. Hello, Daria. Thank you very much for your talk. Actually, my question is a bit of a follow-up of where I left my discussion, because also in the examples you showed us, it's more often than not also the research, but representation of AI as well. It's more often than not men building female robots. I think also in the media history, even from Pygmalion into the 2nd century BC, we still have the exact same narrative. I think there's only one in Black Mirror episode where it's a woman having a male partner the cases are very few and far between. So I would like your opinion on that, especially to connect also with Ksenia's question, because in those examples we have AI that is almost miraculously made to look like a grown-up adult human that can immediately have the functions of an adult woman, but in a better, more controlled, function. Whereas in AI, as you also said, and these principles are dated since Turing, it's actually the other way around. We have something and we allocate time and resources to spend teaching it to become something. We don't just take attributes and bestow them on these artificial humans. So yeah, I would like to hear your opinion on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Actually, it's one more big question and long question, but maybe for the first part of it, actually, there are now many movies that has the opposite representation. For example, I know in Germany, this year film Ekman, Dein Mensch, it's about men, artificial intelligence, love with women. In Russia, there are the movie about non-ideal man for women and something like this. And actually, there are many different strategies. For me, it's interesting, that's it's like maybe about this model as a window of overtone. Then media representation has moved the opinion of people. Yes, and I see actually in all this movie on this mass media something that could change the mass opinion about artificial intelligence. And so many movies, so many represents of love with artificial intelligence had changed their relationship to this situation that now it seems like impossible, but for young people who looks at it, it seems like maybe why not? It's not so. Actually, we not speak about possible or impossible. We speak is it good or maybe better, or maybe it's another point of view, and it's a very interesting topic. It could be developed further and further. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
So thank you, Daria, for your talk. And we have one more talk by Ksenia Zhernova, who also made the questions as well. Yeah, so please, Ksenia, you have 15 minutes for everything, for topic Q&A section.
Yes, it's me again. I'm going to share a screen from my PC. Just 1 second. Yes, there we go. So my topic is called Why Do You Care? It's a small research on in-game care for the characters, for the playable ones, and also for NPCs. First of all, I would like to say that, in my opinion, love is a complex emotion, feeling, and one of the key bricks on which it's built is care. You care for the person that you love. It's relevant for not only for romantic love, but also for love in general, for love to our family, to relatives, to friends, to animals, and so on. So since it's a small talk and this talk, I don't have the ability to elaborate on biological or psychological aspects of love and care and even emotions in general. So I just take 3 basis points to begin with. Second, yes. So the first one is that you can't love someone without caring for him or her. Of course, I may be oversimplifying the question, but in the frame of this talk, it stands like this. The second point is that games can provoke emotions. It's mere anger, like losing and happy of a winning, to something more complex and deep, like care itself. My third point is that players can be emotionally attached to characters as well as playable characters and NPCs. So this all brings us to the following question, like one of the main question of my talk. How exactly do we force, or better say encourage, a player to care for his playable character or for an NPC? The important thing here is care for. Why is this important? Let's look on Adrian Familiar's article from 2014, where he talks about 2 types of empathy, cognitive and emotional. Cognitive empathy means that the player's position to his playable character will be, I am this character. So player associates himself with that character, while emotional empathy is precisely, I care for this character. So in my opinion, if we want our players to care for and afterwards maybe feel some kind of love towards their playable characters or for NPCs, then we should provoke the player to feel emotional empathy. Of course, I admit that there may be some other ways to make the player care for a character, and I would really love to discuss them if we have the time. But here I would like to focus only on this approach. So from here now on, we can count on emotional empathy only. Which brings us to the following question. Which tools do we have that can invoke in a player an emotional empathy? In Adrian Familiar's article, he points out one of the few key points that, in his opinion, may help invoke an emotional empathy. It's a third-person view, maybe even not just one, but a few playable characters. Add to that a caretaken theme, and seems like we are ready to go. And that recipe seems coherent and working. It really is, but we have a but. Let's look at the game This War of Mine. This is the survival game. We control a few playable characters. They are civilians trying to survive in their own home city that turned into a war zone. So basically, we can relate to the characters because they are, like most of the players, civilians. So this game contains all of the points that Familiash said. The third-person view, a few playable characters, and caretaking them, because we really take care of the characters in a way that we treat their wounds, we put them to sleep, we force them to go to raids to find food and medicine, and also we force them to rob and kill the NPCs that are also as civilians. So our characters, being as close as they could be to real persons, and the world is built to feel like the real world, like the real event. So these characters may get depressed and commit a suicide because they don't like to kill other citizens, which is totally fine. And I guess that this is one of the parts why we could relate to that characters. So, which interesting to us is the reviews from the players who played this War of Mine. There are many reviews, mostly positive, from the players who liked the game and who felt and care for the characters. But also there are some reviews where the players didn't felt anything for the characters at all, or not to that extent, or felt or cared only for very playable characters and not for NPCs. But on the other hand, and which is really interesting, they have some cases where the players described their emotions from the game, and they said that they usually play this type of survival games not emotionally invested and not caring for the characters. But this game made them really care for them, and not only for the playable ones, but also for NPCs. So this is interesting because that means that game has something in itself that provokes the player to care for their characters. So so this brings us to another questions and things that we do have. What we do have is in-game tools that pointed out by Khmelyash. They are questionable in my opinion because they do work in the games, but also there are examples of the games that don't have one or any of these points, and they still invoke in the player the emotional empathy. But it's, let's repeat them again, it's a third-person view, few playable characters, and caretaking theme. Also, we have narrative tools. They should be relevant to the theme and the idea of the game. These narrative tools are like a must-have list from the narrative experts, which is repeated on their books and many articles and lectures and so on. So this is a coherent general narrative that we do believe in the world and in our action in our actions in that world, which means that we should not allow any ludonarrative dissonance between the story and the in-game actions of the player. Of course, it's a compelling storytelling, so we believe again in the world and in the events, and also we should have an elaborated character arcs, so we see how they evolve, so we could relate to them and believe in that characters. But what we have here is the narrative tools mostly, and we don't actually know for now how we could provoke the emotional empathy from the game mechanics, like what exact game mechanics should be in the game to invoke emotional empathy in the player, or put it that way, what should the game force the player to do so he would start to care. Actually, my talk is really small, and this almost an end of it, but that question brings me to thinking. I have a theory, it's need to be examined further, firstly from a psychological approach, and I may be not right, but what I was questioning myself, that it sounds like this. If we willingly make actions towards a person, and these actions are planned to have a positive effect on that person, does our brain really get the signal that yes, if we do something good for that person, means we are helping him, that we do care for that person? It's somewhere that I probably have seen. I'm not sure that it is really a psychological article, and also which got me thinking that our brain is pretty naive. For example, when we take in a meal, our brain gets the signal that everything is okay, that our surroundings are safe, and he could relax and we could eat, and not think about that someone will stab us in the back. So if that theory is correct, then we have to answer the question, what exact care actions should we force the player to make in the game to trick his brain into starting to actually care for, to provoke his emotional empathy? Maybe it is the feeling of responsibility that, like, if you do or don't do something, there will be consequences. But yet again, why should the player care about these consequences in the first place? So the really important question which I came to is this: at which moment and why the player starts to give his actions a narrative meaning, wherever it was embedded or even not embedded in the game. So with this question hangs in the air, I'm finishing my talk, and if we have time to discuss, I'm ready to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ksenia. Thank you very much. I think that partly, I think that some literature from the presentation by Renata could answer partly your question, because Renata, as I remember, was talking also about the specific designing mechanisms for creating this romantic romance in games, for example, by anthropomorphizing the characters and to create this loop of of giving a positive feedback of your actions that give some good response, like with pets, for example, yeah, as I understood it from the talk. So I think that, I think that you can examine and prove your hypothesis and theory also by having and reading the presentation by slides, the slides by Renata Ntelia again. I think that she promised to send me, and that I promised to share with you in Facebook. But anyway, I think that maybe others who are also here could give some advice to Ksenia if they want to. Yeah. If there is something to recommend Ksenia to read on this topic and so on, for example. Yeah, I see Renata want to say something.
Yes, thank you, Ksenia, for your presentation. There has been some research on how design-specific elements can help with care. But what I wanted to ask, and of course, I'll be happy to talk more with you about it, because I think we have very common research areas.
Yes.
But I would like to ask if you can go a bit further or a bit more into detail about the narrative part of care and the psychological part of care, because I think games, exactly because they require our action taking, are in and of themselves an act of care. Murring has talked a lot about this, playing as an act of care. And even in personal relationships, we care because we allocate resources, basically, to other people. So even though, yes, we care about another person, it's still very self-centered. It's because we have limited resources, because we're mortal, and since we've allocated some of them to someone, we want to see this relationship come to a positive outcome. So I'm not sure narrative in itself plays as an important role. It definitely accentuates or helps with the experience, but I think just acting with a character solves half of the problem. What is your opinion on that? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Actually, it's also the question for me to think about, but for now, I think that it's important how the player himself is placing himself in the game. Like if he is willing to emotionally invest in the game and to start to care for the characters and for the events, or if he just, no matter what the narrative is, what the story is, just playing the game to play to win. So I guess that narrative could be important, at least in my opinion, of that, because of that few cases on this war of mine where the players started to care. But I'm not sure that it is really the narrative, like the story and the characters. Maybe it's basically exact actions that players are forced to do. So it's also a question for me.
Yeah, after all,
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the thing is that it is important to frame some actions by narrative, which is which you cannot do totally by, I think, totally only and solely by ludic mechanisms without any, I don't know, at least narrative design and so on. So I think we need to stop right now because we are actually already ran out of time, and we took extra 10 minutes for this seminar. I think, well, at least I tried a little bit, but I think that the seminar went better than I expected, actually. So I hope that for the first time of this meeting, it was not bad and actually good for you as well. And well, I think I, at least as an organizer, need some feedback from you about all the organizational things, about how we are making the plans, about how we are organizing the small presentations in Facebook as these comments to the posts by me. And yeah, I think we have not so much time right now to talk about it, but maybe you could send me, reach me with Facebook or with emails if you want to give some advice or some criticism about how it all was organized. If this is possible for you, so please contact me by email. I mean, basically, I mean the email that is used exactly for this. I will type it in the chat room right now. Sorry. Just a moment. Yes, this one. So to give some criticisms and positive or negative feedback to me, and yeah, also feel free to contact me on Facebook and send me some wishes or recommendations about our further work. So anyway, thank you again. Thank you, Renata, for your time and for your talk and so on. And thank you for other presenters, talkers, speakers. I'm sorry, speakers from today. For thank you, Daria, Ksenia, and Mark as well. So see you in see you in 2 weeks, and this will be, by the way, just a small announcement. We have our next meeting in 2 weeks, and the talk will be made by Lars de Wild, who is also here, but not cannot be viewed right now. But nevertheless, he will talk about religion and gods in video games, which is also a nice topic as for me. And yes, please, I will make a post on it in our group on Facebook tomorrow. So please type in your own proposals for short presentations after Lars de Wild one. And yeah, the first 3 of you will be able to make their presentations like today. Yeah. So
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
It was great.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Goodbye then.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Goodbye.